Moon Knight episode 5. So, welcome back to the channel. If you are new, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. I'm Anthony22, and with us is episode 5 of Moon Knight. So, let's get into it. Um, so where we last picked off, we picked off with the hippo goddess. I forgot her name. I'm sorry. And as she encounters both Mark and Steven. And we open this episode with the continuation of that. Essentially, what it is, and this is my best uh, attempt to try to depict this sort of god and religion, because again, I'm not really used to Egyptian gods and their beliefs. But essentially, Stephen and Mark are both two separate entities. Because are two personalities, essentially, they have to undergo this sort of trial, I guess it is, in which they have to essentially place their heart or hearts on a little scale and to see if it balances in order for them to gain access to the afterlife. Another thing that I began to notice was that Stephen and Mark are really, now that they're sort of in this afterlife state, the two of them being together and separate opens the world up, as we're going to see later on in this episode. So they try to balance their hearts. The scales go unbalanced, in which it turns out that they have to end up confessing some things in order to make the scales balance, in order for them to go to the afterlife, in order for them to get a chance to sort of go back to the real world. So what ends up happening is we go through this episode. Now, this episode really isn't action-packed as it is storytelling. The storytelling is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, this is one of the best, I don't know if you want to call it origins of it, or if you want to call it whatever, but this was an amazing episode when it comes to everything else. Just, oh my God. All right, so let's start. So we get flashbacks of essentially Mark's life, and we end up learning that as a child, Mark had a younger brother. But one day, while they were out, traveling, while they were playing, they end up stumbling to this cave while it was raining, and then it turns out that the cave ended up filling with water. So much water that Mark's brother ended up drowning in it. And what ends up happening is the mother of Mark Spector ends up having a lot of hatred towards Mark. And the reason is because essentially she believes that Mark let him die. Obviously, we know that as a kid, you're not really in control of that big of a thing. But to Mark's mom, seeing the fact that her son didn't do nothing and let her other son die is something that is totally unforgivable. And it's going to have a lot of effect when we see it later. So we end up learning a bunch of things. We end up actually seeing not only the origins, but we actually end up seeing other memories, which include the origins on how Mark ended up meeting Khonshu. Of course, there was Mark was a mercenary, and he ended up going to try to find, he was attacking he was attacked by a bunch of people, and he was essentially about to commit suicide, but he ends up being offered to take on the role of Moon Knight by Khonshu himself. Like, literally, he was about to die right in front of the tomb of Khonshu when he ended up accepting his offer of being the Moon Knight, and that's how we basically get that origin. We also get ins and outs of sort of the mental state that Mark's in. Now, one of the big things about this episode is what is real and what is not. And from what it seems like, they're doing a really, really good job at sort of picturing that the hospital that we saw Mark enter at the end of episode 4 is supposed to be the real world. But we get subtle clues every now and then that it's actually not. That the world that Mark is in right now is all a hallucination. And he has to sort of try to find his way to go into the realm with him and Mark separate. And then he has to also deal with him in a hospital facility in which he's been labeled as insane with dissociative identity disorder. It's a really good back and forth between what's real and what's imaginary, but it's also really makes you question, like, okay, is this real? And is this imaginary place actually going to be affected in the real world? It's a really good back and forth that makes you wonder what's going to be happening. And the interactions definitely hint at one thing, but what also pointing towards another. For example, when Mark is interacting with Dr. Arthur Harrow, it seems like that's the real world. But there's other clues and other interactions between those two that hint towards the fact that this is a made up world. That the world of the hospital that he's currently at is something else entirely different that is trying to keep Mark out of focus on trying to, get back to where he was, which was back in the pyramids in the tomb of Amit. So it's a really, really great thing, and it's something that I don't even think, when it comes to superheroes, just in general, I never really seen any superhero movie in which the hero deals with some kind of mental disorder. In this case, we're dealing with, obviously, dissociative identity disorder. And it does a really good job with the depiction of it between the back and forth, not only in Mark's mind, but also in the real life world, how it affects people. And as we see Mark struggling to try to remain sane in front of everybody else's eyes, but while also trying to interact and get through this whole little mindset that he's in between him and Steven. It's a great thing, and I really did enjoy it. I don't think not even just Marvel, but I don't even think any DC or any other superheroes have really delved into the topic of mental disorder or mental health. Yeah, there has been like some superheroes that have dealt with like some sort of disability. Like you have like Daredevil with blindness, and you have like maybe a couple other situations like you have like Batman with the death of his parents, but you never deal with something that's like truly inner mental illness. And I think that it's really, really good, and I think that the depiction that they did in Moon Knight was fascinating. So we continue forward with the journey between Mark and Steven as they're traveling, and we get essentially a bunch of flashbacks when it comes to the episodes. We see that they take a sort of detour and enter Mark Spector's life, and we find out a couple of things. One, they stuck to the Jewish heritage, I believe. Well, I'll get to that in a bit, but we end up finding out that after Mark's younger brother ended up dying, his mom ended up having a lot of hatred for him. Essentially to the point where the relationship between Mark and his parents was only between Mark and his dad. And his mom completely hated him up to every other point. It's really, really sad because when a parent sort of deals that with a child, it really sucks because the child really didn't do anything. Mark had no control over that whole incident and stuff like that. And it really is unfortunate that his mother is taking out her anger on him. As we end up seeing, this was the big sort of revelation. So as Mark in one incident is hiding in his bedroom, his mom's knocking on the door, just utterly angry at him and just so bad. What a terrible parent. We end up finding out that Mark ends up switching into Steven during this whole childhood. That what ends up happening is Mark essentially created Steven as sort of a mental switch in order for Steven to take all the pain and suffering instead of Mark. So what ends up happening is as soon as Mark's mom is about to enter the room, he switches over to Steven, and then as Steven's taking control, doing his own thing, Mark's mom ends up entering and ends up taking her abuse out on Steven using a belt. It's really interesting how Mark was really aware of the dissociative identity disorder, and it's something that he's had this ever since childbirth, which is, I don't think, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think in the comics Mark didn't get his dissociative identity disorder until after he became the Moon Knight. I could be wrong. But the fact that Mark has essentially had Steven since he was young really does say a lot about the characters and it just shows that essentially Steven was the stress ball, the one who would take the hits, the one who would take all the abuse. He would have little memories going back and forth, but those memories to Steven are some of the best ones because he grew up with a mother, because he grew up in a peaceful environment. He didn't grow up with Mark's backstory of having to lose the brother and having to go through the hatred of your mother. It's something that's so interesting that makes you feel bad for both characters, but at the same time makes you think, oh, so they like, it makes it have a good job at both characters are struggling with something, but in return they're also dealing with something good. Steven, he doesn't have a lot of his life. He doesn't recall a whole lot of his life, but he at least in his mind thinks of himself as having a good relationship between his mother. Mark, on the other hand, is living a terrible life. He's dealing with so much hatred and so much negativity. But on the good side, he has Steven in order to take that hatred and in order to accept the punishments that his mom is going to give him, which I really, really do love. It's a great back and forth between the two characters. So the episode ends with both of them on the verge of entering the paradise. And they're both over there sitting and wondering what's going to happen. The scales are still not complete. And we end up finding out that they're essentially being attacked by the people that Mark has killed. So Mark ends up trying to defeat them. He struggles because of the amount of people that he has to deal with. And they're actually, one thing I noticed is that the people are actually made out of sand. So I'm a big Spider-Man fan, so this reminded me a lot of Sandman for some reason. Just the way the characters were like taking punches. It reminded me a lot of Sandman for some reason. So I'm just a big fan of that. But as Mark is struggling, we see that Steven ends up joining in on the fight. He actually ends up taking a bunch of them down with a bat. And then we get the big sort of revelation or the big gasp moment. As Mark is almost about to be thrown overboard, Steven ends up going in. He takes the enemy that was attacking Mark, and both Steven and the enemy end up going overboard, essentially leaving Steven on the sands that end up turning him into some kind of sand sculpture. That essentially he dies, right? And then we end up finding out that the scales are actually balanced. Now, there's a couple of things I wanted to say about this. One, the scales are balanced for me for two reasons. Either one, because Mark is the only one left alive, that means that because there's just one person and also there was one feather, that both of the scales end up balancing. Two, because we have Mark and a potential third identity, which is Jake, I feel like could be another reason as to why the scales are balanced. Because there is two personalities left instead of three, it's an even number, so that way it balances out. I don't know. I could be stretching it a little bit too much. I don't know. But the episode finally ends with Mark essentially waking up in a big field. I don't know what kind of field it was, like maybe a wheat field. And we hear music going by, and we see the camera pan, and Mark ends up turning over, and the episode ends with, again, another sort of like, it's shocking how this field is going to lead into the season finale, which is next week. So again, we only got one more episode, but again, it's like, where are we going to pick up now, and how is this whole situation going to be solved with not only Mark, but with the mental hospital, but with also the real life tomb of Ahmed? Like, how is all of this going to be solved? I'm really, really interested to see it next week. But until then, we're going to have to wait. Anyways, this was honestly one of the best episodes as we close this thing off. One of the best episodes, in my opinion. Not just in like MCU shows, but also like MCU content as a whole. Definitely outshining some movie moments and definitely beating the TV shows. This might be my number one TV show when we're finished with this, but we're gonna have to wait till next week. Overall, love the episode. This was a solid like 9.5, just when it comes to the whole origins. Definitely a great episode, and it didn't even contain a lot of action, but I think they're gonna be saving that for next week as we get into the big finale. But anyways, that's going to be it for my review. I hope you guys did enjoy it. Again, be sure to do like, comment, subscribe for all that. My name is Anthony Salick, and I will see you all next week for the season finale of Moon Knight. We're almost there, guys. One more episode. Wish you all a good day, and I'll see you all later.